I'm going to try recording again. We got stopped during the last one. I'll see what I can cut out from this. I'm going to start here where I left off with the last one, the New Yorker Writers' School. The New Yorker is a magazine that's been published since the 1920s, so it's almost 100 years old. It's probably the most prestigious magazine in the United States, particularly with regard for the publishing of fiction and for poetry. It comes out weekly. It has a circulation of just over 500,000, and its audience skews affluent and well educated. I've been reading it for like 40 something years. I've been a subscriber since the early 1970s. It's still one of my favorite magazines. The New Yorker School of Fiction writers, however, tend to be a fairly small group, and they tend to write stories that are similar in that they focus on relationships between men and women, between their status in society. It's a small group of characters. One big thing happens, like Nettie swimming through the pools. One big decision leads to a variety of complicated consequences. Bobby Ann Mason is a New Yorker writer, as is Shirley Jackson, who we'll meet later on in the course. High quality stuff, but a very small world internal to the story. So we'll have to see what you think about that. Here is Austining, New York. It's the stand-in for Shady, for the town that Cheever stories take place in. It's on the east side of the Hudson River. That's this big blue thing that you see here in the middle. And this is the little bit of New York and a little bit of New Jersey. I used to be stationed up here at West Point, just north of where Austining is on the west side of the river. This is Connecticut over here on the right. Again, I've circled Austining up here. I lived right over here at where West Point is, and I used to take the train from Garrison. I'd cross the river at a bridge and then go down from Garrison into New York City when I take the train. This is the Hudson line. This is the one that Blake takes in the 543. You can see the other two lines here, the New Haven line and the Harlem line. These are the major commuter rail lines that come into Grand Central Station, which I'll show you in a second. And this is how hundreds of thousands of commuters get in and out of New York City every day. These little lines over here, this is New Jersey, and these lines actually start down at Penn Station, and they run into the New Jersey part. This part runs from New Jersey into New York, and there's a number of people who take the train from places like Middletown, Campbell Hall into New York City, but it's about a 2-hour commute. It's a long, long, long way. There's John Cheever standing next to one of the commuter trains that would have been used in his own time. They look a little bit like some of the more contemporary Amtrak cars that you might see here in St. Louis. The train doesn't look much like this anymore. It looks a little bit more commutery, something different, maybe more like sort of above the Metrolink but below Amtrak. Here's Grand Central Station. This is where Blake's trip starts in the 548. This is what it looks like right now. It's an extraordinary 1909 Beaux-Arts building, huge place, hundreds of railroad tracks underneath it, and thousands of people in it at any time, day or night. This is the Shady Hill train station. This is actually Austining, that's called Shady Hill in all of Cheever's stories. So you can get an idea of Blake getting off the train over here with the left-hand side, going over this little bridge into the parking lot and then leaving. And the train station hasn't changed a whole lot since the story was written. This glass thing was put in sometime in the 80s, but this other view over here on the left gives you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like. And again, you've got the different rail lines and the different rail tracks that go through there. This is what New York looks like in the 50s when the story is set. You can see over here at Grand Central Station again, the ticket counters, the big balcony. There's a restaurant up here now. It's really a lovely place to go. This is the information booth still there, and it's exactly the same place. But you can see all the people, and you can get an idea of what people wore and what they might have looked like and how they carried themselves. Over here on the left, this is Madison Avenue in the 50s, and this is about when and where Blake works. Madison runs parallel to Park, which runs next to Fifth, and between Madison and Fifth is where Grand Central Station is. Okay. The Swimmer, the story that we have that's in our textbook, was turned into a movie in 1968 starring Burt Lancaster. And it was filmed in about the same place where the story takes place. So you get an idea of what the homes look like and what the swimming pools look like. It's an elongated version of the story, so we get more dialogue. We meet the same people, but we spend more time with them. It's an interesting film. I could have had this added into our Blackboard site, but with all the trouble we've had with the dead, I'm not sure it would have done us any good at all. So you haven't missed much by not having it included, but you can find clips of it on YouTube, and you might want to take a look at those and see if you get an idea of what the world of Nettie Merrill might look like. Here's early in the story, Nettie talking to one of the many women that he talks to in the story. I have no idea which one this is, but it's obviously someone he knows pretty well or he's trying to impress because she's at least letting him hold her feet. Here we see him early in the film when he's hale and hearty and he's the master of his own fate as he decides where he's going to go from place to place to place. This, of course, as you know from the story, won't last very long. And here he is at the end when he's looking in the gates of his own house and he suddenly realizes that he's locked out, that it's dark, that it's empty, his family is gone, his children are gone, and indeed his whole life is gone. Some things to think about when we're thinking about Cheever stories. It's a tiny world, these New York City suburbs of really upper middle class white people largely. And males are the major focus. We have far more developed male than female characters in most Cheever stories. I think this reflects a kind of distribution of power myself, although I could be wrong about that, where the powerful characters, the powerful figures are the men. They have a lot more agency than the women do in here. We'll see, however, two women, Miss Dent and Nettie's mistress, who kind of get revenge on the males who have put themselves into circumstances that they don't care for very much. Cheever, as a writer, is a man who's a fairly devout Episcopalian in some ways, and in some ways not so much. But he's always concerned with this idea of sin and redemption and what exactly is sin and what's an appropriate punishment and how do we get punished and why do we get punished and how long should it last and how much punishment leads to redemption. And so that's something to think about as you're reading these two stories. Who's kind of the sinner, who's redeemed, who's punished, how are they punished, things like that. And it's not always clear who exactly is the sinner and who is the sinned against. So I'll be interested in a discussion board to see what you have to say about that if you choose to answer those kinds of questions. Blake in the 548, I think, gets what he deserves. He picks up Miss Dent, he has his way with her, and he abandons her, and she punishes him for that. The question is that punishment appropriate? Does Blake get what he really deserves? There's also a concern with appearances in that story. Blake talks about the sumptuary laws, and these were real things. These were medieval and Renaissance rules about what people in certain social classes were allowed to wear. And these were very, very strictly enforced, certainly in Elizabethan England, so that common people couldn't dress like they were rich people. That never would happen. Okay. Another issue that pops up a lot in this story, as well as in The Swimmer, is the notion of infidelity, about husbands and wives having marriages that are rocky or that go through a difficult patch when they meet somebody else. As we've talked about earlier, marriage is a complicated subject, both in the real world and in a fictional world, and I think it's exploited in some fairly complex ways in both of these stories. Certainly Blake's marriage is awful. There's no other word to put for it. But Nettie's marriage, we just know what we know. We don't realize it's over until Nettie gets to the very end of the story. One of the questions you might have about Nettie is, what exactly has he done to deserve what happens to him? What kind of sin or series of sins has he committed? Has he repented? And I think Burt Lancaster does a really good job in the film of kind of showing you somebody who goes through life without having to worry too much. But suddenly here at the end, he's confronted with his past in this journey, and he suddenly realizes, perhaps, or we realize on his behalf, that he has done some pretty terrible things. Perhaps he's deserved what he gets, perhaps not. Some of you who are more Old Testament minded might see some parallels between the book of Job and Nettie's story. If you want to talk about that in the discussion board, I'd be really interested to see that. Well, thank you very much for your patience. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to